Now, let us see what happened to the product of Manchester to India. What are the reasons that brought Manchester products to India and what happened to the Indian products during that period of time? So, as we all know that Indian cotton is the finest cotton available in the world. It was rightly remarked by Henry Patullo in 1772 that the demand for Indian cotton would never reduce because it is the finest cotton produced in the world and no other country in the world was able to produce such a fine quality of cotton. But interestingly, and the different aspect or astonishing fact is that in 1811 to 12, the trade export of Indian cotton was 33%. By 1851, it has been dropped to 3%. So what happened? As Henry Patullo rightly remarked that the Indian product is of high quality, then what are the factors that brought down the Indian share of exports from 33% to 3%? The story is England. The cotton industries started to emerge in England after 1840. So once the cotton industries started to emerge in England, in Britain, the companies in England started to pressurize the government to put more kind of import taxations on the imports what we are getting from the other countries, so that would stabilize the trade for the local market to get itself moved on. So this taxation on the imports increased on the Indian cotton which is being imported into England. So obviously the product of the cost became more and the availability of the Manchester cloth or the cotton at very less cost in the market gave boom for the Manchester to become a larger sold piece in the market when it is compared to the Indian product in the market. And the other factor is that Indian markets were also being flooded with the Manchester's cotton as a product of the Britain. So the export trade of India has also come down, but it also started to collapse the local Indian market in India itself. So there are two major difficulties which are being faced for the Indian cotton weavers. One is there was no export trade, the taxation has been increased on exports. The other major one is the local competition was also made available by bringing the Manchester cotton into the Indian market. After this has come into collapse, in 1860s, it has become very difficult for the Indian weavers to get the supply of cotton because the entire cotton has been sent to the Britain directly by the officials. So in the scarcity and in the necessity to buy cotton, there is one more problem to fuel to the increase of the cost is that the civil war in US, which has made the issues to broke off and the cotton supply from US has been stopped to Britain. So the demand for the cotton in Britain has been increased and the prices of the cotton bales has been shooted up immediately. So the Indians whoever need the cotton have to pay a very huge amount to get it. The Indians really started to find it very difficult, and though they produce it with a lot of difficulty, doing a lot of sacrifices, all together the entire family working together, the imports and the exports are being banned and there was a large amount of taxation put on the Indian cotton. So many of the weavers started to leave this weaving and move on to the cultivation of the crops. So that's how the weavers started to face a lot of problems. Let us have a quick recap of what happened and what is the main theme of Manchester coming to India. As it is mentioned by Henry Patullo in 1772, the demand for the Indian cotton would always be high because it is the fine quality which is available in the world. No other country in the world can produce such a fine quality of cotton. But drastically and astonishingly, the Indian export of cotton in 1811 to 12 was 33% has been fallen down to 3% in 1851. The story behind this was the England cotton industries started to emerge in the early part of the 19th century, and by around 1840s they all got settled. And now, in order to increase their trade, the Manchester, the products, the officials are being pressurized by the cotton industries that to put extra import duties on the products which are imported from the India and the other countries, so that it would save the local crop and the local trade. And it was also being told to sell in the British product in the Indian market also, so that they would get an abroad market into connectivity. So that's how the imports taxation has been increased, and it was also brought into the Indian markets. So the exports and the local markets are being collapsed for the Indian weavers. This gave a big blow to the Indian weavers in the middle of the 19th century. And later on in 1860s, there was no supply of cotton available for the Indian people at all, especially Indian weavers, because the entire cotton has been directed and diverted to the Britain. And in the wake of the US Civil War, there was a close off connections or cut off of availability of the cotton from the US side to the Britain. So the demand for the cotton has been shooted up to a very larger level, and any Indian weaver who would like to buy cotton has to pay a huge amount and buy the cotton bales. So that's how the prices has been shooten up, the difficulties has been increasing day to day. The Manchester came to India and destroyed the Indian market. It also spoiled by putting extra imports taxes on the Indian products in UK. So that's how Indian weavers were pushed into the pit of troubles, where they could not find any other hope, because though they do a lot of hard work, the entire family has been striving hard to do any project which is assigned for them, but they are getting very less amount paid. And now with the increase of the cost of the cotton bales, it has become very difficult task for them to do any even a small activity. This is how the weavers started to get into more and more troubles in the middle of the 19th century. Now we shall see how did the factories were set up in India. Factories coming up, that's discussed as a fourth aspect in our unit. Now when we talk about the factories, we have seen how the system of factories got emerged in Britain. Initially it was made by the merchants. Merchants used to go nearby to the peasants, where the peasants who are willing to work there, the work has been distributed between them, and finally they used to work for the merchant without getting displaced from their hometown or the home villages. Later on the situations got changed because of the failure in the cultivation sector, failure of the agriculture, resulted in the people to migrate towards the towns and towards the cities, wherein the scarcity or the unemployment situation became very high, the availability of the labor became very rich for them. This made the possibility for them to hire more number of employees within the cities and within the towns. That's how it got industrialized and the situations got changed. Now moving on to the Indian context, how did the factories come up in India? In which year actually the industrialization got started up? In which place actually the industries were established first, or the factories were established first? What was the first industry that was established in India? Who were the people who established industries in India? How did they get the income to establish in India? How were they able to motivate or mobilize the capital in order to invest in a large scale section or a sector like factories? How many of them were successful? What were their prior businesses before coming into this one? Let us focus on the aspect now. In 1854 in Bombay, the first production unit was started. It was a cotton mill which was started in Bombay in 1854. It came into production after 2 years, that is in 1856. So the first factory was being established in 1854 at Bombay. The modern name of Bombay is Mumbai. So in Mumbai, the present day Mumbai, which was in the ancient period or in the pre-independence period known as Bombay, got the privilege to establish the first factory at its location. It happened in 1854. The first cotton mill was established and it started to produce its production after 2 years, and in 1862 4 more mills were established with the capacity of 94,000 spindles and 2,150 looms. The entire machinery reveals for us that how much far we are able to advance and how the factory owners are willing to procure the modern technology by getting the machinery into the country. So this we can understand very clearly by getting the figure here, 94,000 spindles and 2,150 looms. In 1855, we have one more factory established of jute in the far east, that is in Bengal. In 1854, it is in Bombay. In 1855, it is in Bengal. And one more factory was established 7 years later. Another jute industry was established in 1862, that is after 7 years, in the eastern coast, that is also in the Bengal region, focused on the Hooghly belt. Now let us move on. In 1860, one more industry was established, that is at Kanpur. Then in 1861, it is at Ahmedabad, just 1 year later after it was established at Kanpur. And in 1874, we got some more spinning and weaving mills established at the present most important city of South India, that is present name is Chennai, the previous name was Madras. So we got many mills got established, but the first credit goes to Bombay in 1854. By 1874, you got the mills getting scattered and putting up at different corners, first starting at Bombay, then moving on to the east at the Bengal, then we have at the Kanpur, then we have them in the Ahmedabad in the west, then moving on to the southeast, Chennai or Madras. So this is how the industrial location started to put from the later part of the 19th century or the second part of the 19th century. It is only after 1850 we got the factories setting up in India. So now the fundamental question is, who established the factories? As I mentioned here, it was established in Bombay, it was established in different places, it was established in Bengal, it was established in Kanpur, it was established at Ahmedabad. Who are the people who started these industries or factories? Who financed them? How did they get the capital? What were they doing before coming into these industrial production activity? We will focus our light onto this now. As we discussed till now, from where did the capital come for the Indian businessmen to put the investments? So here is the story. In order to understand the story, we need to go back, way back, Indians trading with the China people during the 8th century period. So during that period, we all remember that Indian products were exported and imported from China and the other all countries. So as the period went on, the trading has been giving a fruitful experience for the Indians. Though when we discuss initially the Britishers, I think you all remember the Opium War concept. Before, opium was not accepted by the people in China. So in order to build relations with China, Britishers started to cultivate opium in India and then export it to the other countries. Not only opium, indigo, all these things they used to do it in India and then export it to China, and then the excess surplus amount what they are getting, they used to manage it to trade with China the other products other than the opium. So that's how the business was in tactic. So Britishers were doing this business, but Indian players were juniors in this one. Indians were also involved in this to very limited extent. But the juniors, after doing for some years, they got the experience. They know how to do the business. They started to do their business practically and in a profitable way. So the most successful person among this was Dwarkanath Tagore. Dwarkanath Tagore belongs to Bengal region. He used to do trade with the China people, and up to 1830s and 40s, he was the most fortunate person to own more number of companies in China. Before he returned to India, in 1830 to 1840 period, he established nearly 6 joint stock companies under his rule. So he was the most rich person during that period of time, but due to the crisis which happened in 1840, the trade has come down and many of them lost their wealth in that crisis period. One among them was Dwarkanath Tagore. So once Dwarkanath Tagore lost his wealth, that came down again. The Indians became a junior players. But the trade which came after 1850s made many of them to get flourished, especially the Indians in relation with the China trade. Some of them who got very much profited were from Bombay, the Parsi community people, the Parsis, Dinshaw Petit and Jamshedji Tata. These people made their fortune by doing trade with China, and especially when it comes to Jamshedji Tata, Jamshedji Tata did not do only trade with China people. Half of his income was from the trade from the cotton which he exported to Britain also. So that's how he had double-edged profit, not only from China but also from Britain. So they had huge income as a capital for them. And we also have one more person like Seth Hukum Chand. In 1917, this man established the first jute mill at Kolkata region. So he also was one of the fortunate person who earned from the Indo-Chinese trade relations. And later on, we also have to remember J.D. Birla, the other famous name after the Tatas when it comes to business. So J.D. Birla's father and grandfather also did the same business, were in the same lines how they have earned huge profits. But later on, though Indian industries were established in the later part of the 19th century, but till we were under the control of the Britishers, India is still a colonial nation. So the activity of the Indian businessmen was completely restricted only to the Indian land, and there were a lot of restrictions not to allow the Indians to move or to do trade with the other country people or with the other trader community people. So somehow after the First World War only, many of the Indian businessmen got the chance to interact with the other businessmen people, as a demand and the necessity also gave a chance for the people to get opportunities to discuss openly and freely with all the others, because during the World War I and after the World War I, Britain started literally to come down financially and also in the terms of economic power as well as in the army powers, because they were not in a position to control all the colonies so effectively before the World War I and after the World War I. So that's how the change has brought some kind of advantage for the Indian merchants. But till Indians established their own chamber of commerce, the European merchants used to do the decisions while the Indian merchants used to put the investments. So the money was paid by the Indian people, Indian merchants, but the decisions were taken by the European merchants literally. Some of the famous stock exchange companies from the European market are the Bird, Higglers and Company, Andrew Yule and Company, and Jardine Skinner and Company. These three are the famous European stock exchange companies in which the Indian merchants used to put their investments. But Indian merchants were not allowed in any of the discussions or not allowed to take part in any of the decision making meetings. Only they were liable or only they were permitted to put their investments, and the entire decisions were taken by the European merchants wholly and solely only to benefit their own countries, not to benefit the Indian merchants. So this is the background story of from where did we get the investments and from where did the people, those who invested in the Indian industries, got their capital amount to put industries or factories. So the story begins from the way back Indo-China trade from the 8th century BC up to 1830. Many of the Indians were in a good prosperous state where they established their own stock exchange companies in China. 1830 to 1840, Dwarkanath Tagore, one of the good examples, he established nearly 6 joint stock exchange companies in China, but due to the crisis in 1840, he needed to leave them and he came back to India. And then after later part of the 1870s to 1880s, we got again the boom in the market. The later people, those who were in business, were able to cherish and flourish. Their incomes became double and triple. Some of the most fortunate people are from Bombay, the Parsi community people. Dinshaw Petit and Jamshedji Tata. Jamshedji Tata did not only acquire the property or the capital from the trade which he did with China, but also from the cotton trade which he did with the Great Britain. And next, moving on to the other fortunate people are the Marwari businessman, Mr. Seth Hukumchand. In 1917, this man was able to establish the first jute mill in Kolkata. And also, we always take the names of Tata and Birla together. So, the Birla groups, J.D. Birla, father and grandfather of J.D. Birla, also did the businesses in the same lines how the Parsi community people, Seth Hukumchand and J.D. Birla fall into the same category, and later on the businesses started to flourish. But the most important problem was India was still a colonial country where we are still restrained and controlled by the British India. Most of the times Indian traders were not allowed to interact with the British merchants, and for a long period of time British merchants or the English merchants used to determine the policy making issues, whereas the investment was made by the Indian merchants. Let us look at the European stock exchange companies in which most of the Indian merchants used to put their investments. One is Bird Hagglers and Company. The second one is Andrew Yule and Company. The third comes under Jardine Skinner and Company. These three are the major companies in which Indian merchants used to keep their investments. But on an overall say, we can say that Indians are just like a watchmen or just like a people who are followed or guided by the English people, because Indian merchants are not involved in any of the decision making meetings or the policy making issues when it comes to the trade meetings. That's how the merchants, Indian merchants especially, got their investments in order to establish their factories in India. So now we got the factories, we got the merchants, we got the capital. The last and the most important factor, where are the workers from? Did the workers in India are sufficient for India or not? Do we face any problem for the workers? Because in the initial period in Great Britain, we found it very difficult for the industrialist people or the factory owners to find people working for wages. So how did India overcome this problem? Let's find the answer for this question. So to answer the fundamental question, from where did the workers come for the Indian factories? As it was a really very difficult task for the factories which were set up in Britain. We have seen the factories facing a lot of trouble or the scarcity of the workers. So we need to find out the solution for this one. That was a big task for the Britain people, but it was completely different when it comes to the Indian context. Indians were always in search of job. So it was not a trouble at all for the Indian factory owners to find workers working at their factory. Let us go into the details now. So from where did the workers come is a fundamental question which has to be answered now. So the workers come from different places, wherever there is a job. So the basic need for the factories is the workers. The workers coming. So in 1901, when the statistics were taken, we have nearly 5,84,000 workers employed. And then when the statistics were taken in 1946, we have 24,36,000 workers working. So when you look at the statistics, it clearly shows for us there is a very huge massive growth in the number of workers getting employed. Here we have nearly 6 lakhs, here we have more than 25 lakhs of workers working here. So more than 4-fold times you got the increase of the number of workers working in the factories, which shows for us very clearly that the need for the workers has increased, has gone up to 4-fold times. When does the need for the workers increase? The need for the workers will increase only when the number of the factories are in rise. So it clearly shows for us that there are the number of rise for the factories in the Indian context. So that's how the need for the workers has increased and the number of workers has gone up. Now moving on to the other things. From where did the workers come? That is a fundamental question for us. in order to answer this fundamental question. The workers used to come from the nearby villages, where in the same case what happened in Great Britain, when the agriculture failed or when they were having no lands, the people used to find the possible next alternative. In the same way, in Indian villages also, when the agriculture was failed or where there are no landless laborers, when there are landless laborers, agricultural labor people who are dependent completely only on the wages, these people started to move in search of jobs towards the cities where these factories are established. So once the factories are established, the news spread in a horizon of vertically and horizontally. The people started to move from very long distances. Initially, people used to move only between the nearby town and the village to the place of work, so that they can easily go back during the time of the harvesting season or during the time of any festive season. But as the news spread on in the Bombay province and in the Madras province, that in Bombay and in Kolkata and in Madras, we have a setting up of factories and there is a need for the job there, where there is a possibility of getting a job there. Immediately, people started to migrate very soon to far off places also. This was one of the major reasons why the Indian factory merchants or the owners did not find any difficulty in getting workers in the day-to-day upgradation of their factories. And what are the techniques that are used by the Indian factory owners to recruit their workers? Finding job was always a difficult task in India. Why it is described as a difficult task in India means, when we have 100 jobs, the number of people looking for the jobs are more than 500 and above. So in order to get 100 jobs, we always have a competition of 500 people waiting or looking for the job. So this added an advantage for the people of the factory owners. So now let us look at an example here. For example, to the factories which are located in Bombay, the people used to come from the nearby village Ratnagiri. People used to migrate from the nearby village and move to Bombay in order to work there. In the same way, when we take the example of Kanpur, from Kanpur, people in the around the Kanpur district used to migrate to the nearby place where the industry has been located. So that's how the possibility of getting the job, the news spread, brought all the jobless people, all the people those who are looking for a job nearby to the place where the factories are located. This gave a huge opportunity for the factory owners to choose the people to work in their factories. That's how the problem of from where do we get the workers has been solved completely and permanently for the Indian factories. And when we move on to the jobs are getting is always a difficulty in India, because the number of workers are always greater than the jobs. So in order to recruit a good people or in order to trust people, the factory owners always employed the jobber. The person is like a recruiter who recruits the people into the factory. Actually, jobber is appointed not on the basis of their educational qualifications or not on their basis of the merits. He is the senior most employee or the old person who is working in the factory from many years. That person is being given the responsibility to recruit the workers into the factory. Most of the times, he brings more number of people from his village to get them employed in the factory. Then this possibility of him getting them employed into the factories made him to get some special place in the society, in the industry, in the factories. And later on, he started to expect and receive certain amount of money, gifts or prizes in order to recruit anyone into the factory. So that's how the actual problem of from where does the workers come has been solved permanently. So this was a fundamental problem for the Britishers, because when they initially established the factories, they found it very difficult to recruit workers for them to work for the wages. But here in India, if you look at the statistics in 1901, we have 5,84,000 workers working. In 1946, we have nearly 24 lakh people working. In villages, whoever does not have any work or any job, or the landless poor peasants, always were in search of jobs in India. These all people moved slowly towards the places where there is a possibility of getting a job. So those people, let us take an example of Bombay. In Bombay, we have the people moving from Ratnagiri, the nearby district. When it comes to Kanpur, we have people coming from Kanpur district, in and around of Kanpur, towards the region. But still, the factories have increased, but the getting a job opportunity was really a difficult task in India even today also. Workers were greater in number when compared to the availability of the jobs, and factory owners always used to employ jobbers in order to recruit the workers. So the jobber role has become crucial in order to recruit the people into the factory. So in return, to get someone recruited into the factory, he started to take some amount or some gift, some price, in order to give some benefit for him to get into the factory. That's how the role of jobber became very important, crucial in society as well as in the factory, because factory also needs workers. So it's completely dependent on jobber's choice of getting the workers, and the people, those who are in search of job, were always giving him some gift in order to get inside to the factory and get employed in the factory. So that's how the basic problem of getting from where do the workers come from has been solved permanently in India. Now moving on to the peculiarities of the industrial growth. Why did the industrial growth in India was different when it comes to the situation which happened in Great Britain? Because the industrial growth in Britain was adding a boom to the Britishers to develop. But when it comes to India, it has been different. What was the peculiarities that happened for that? Let us see here. For the most of the time, Indian merchants, Indian business, Indian trade was almost under the hands of the European managing agencies only for a very long period of time. Afterwards, even the Indian businessmen who established their own businesses did not try to give competition to any of the products which are being imported from the Britain, especially to the products of Manchester. They always tried to keep their market away from the influence of the British people. So they love to export their products towards China and the other countries, but not towards Britain. So they exported towards China most of their products. But the situations got changed completely in the early part of the 20th century. In the wake of the Japanese growth, Japanese developments, in 1906, the Indian yarn which they were producing has started to be produced in a very large extent. It became almost doubled in the production. But the intake for China, where Indians are exporting to China, the trade got declined. What is the reason behind the decline of trade from India to China? The products which are being exported to China are drastically declining. So for that, the Japan products started to flood in to China. The Japanese products which are coming at very less cost into China were influencing the Indian trade in the early part of the 20th century. And now suddenly there was a rise in the business after the initial phase of the 20th century. That is because of the World War II. The World War II was actually the situation which turned Indian production, Indian industries, Indian factories to a very large scale, where they were able to push up their products to the large local markets. You may get a doubt, how can a world war make the local products to sell, the local industries to sell their products locally in a profitable way? That happened like this. When the British mills were busy in producing for their products for the World War, Manchester, which was initially the raw supplier for India, the master supplier for India, started to stop its supply, sending it to India. It was busy in sending their products only to British because of the World War, the cloth, the bags, everything. So the home market in India has been free. The products which are coming from abroad are being blocked. The Manchester products are being stopped. So then the products which are coming within India got a very wide market. So in order to sell their products within the country, they have got a huge opportunity to them. No need to pay much taxation also, because as we all know that Indian products, if they are sent to Britain, they were put extra import duties on that by the Britishers. So automatically the cost of the product would increase. That's how the Manchester products became very popular, with the lack of the tax for them here, and India being put pressure to put more taxes on that. So people would automatically prefer the product which is getting at low cost rather than going for high cost products. And that's how the home market has increased. And also during that time, the Swadeshi movement, the use of the local products to avoid the foreign goods, the ideology started to spread to all the Indians in a very larger scale. So people also started to get themselves motivated to use the local products. So that's how the demand for the local products in the home market of India started to grow day by day into a larger scale. And along with this, the British gave a call to the Indian factories to supply for them the jute bags in the World War, the cloth in the World War, the uniform in the World War, the tents which were to be kept in the wars, the leather boots, and also the horse and the mule saddles. And this gave a boom for the Indian industries to expand in a very larger scale. The Indian merchants started to establish more number of factories, and 3-shift work has been started, where the Indian workers are made to work for long hours. That's how the production has been increased because of the World War I. The boom of the World War created a very large scale market for the Indians in a very interesting and a positive manner. But as the time increased on, and when the World War I came to an end, Manchester was not in a position to take back the original position how it was prior to the World War I. Economically, Britain was completely weak, and now the situation is they are facing a stiff competition from US, Japan and China. So there is no possibility for Britain to recapture its original back position. So now the Indian products have got their own local markets and also been flooded by the China products. China has been flooded by the Japanese products, and Manchester could not be in competition with all these things. So these all things made difficult for the Britishers to regain their position back in the global market, and this added an advantage for the Indian products, Indian merchants, Indian traders to establish their control and monopoly over the local trade on the local markets. That's how Indians were able to succeed only in the later part of the early 20th century, but initially they were struggling very hard to establish their markets because of the pressure which was being mounting on them by the European merchants, European agents and all the British officials. But only after 1920s they were able to stabilize their market in the local levels. Now, what happened to the small scale industries? As we discussed in the previous part of the content here, that the large scale industries got its boom only after the First World War phase, or the boom of the First World War made the market to grow or boom in a very large scale. But what happened to the small scale industries after that time? So, do the small scale industries also got the same boom with the World War I, or what were the situations? Now let us find the answer for this. In 1911, 67% of the industries are located in Bengal and Bombay. This clearly reveals for us that the small scale industries are not at all in a larger areas. The small scale industries are also confined to the industrial areas only. The most famous industries are located in Bombay and Bengal, as we discussed earlier in the previous part. In the same way, we also have the surrounding units of the larger units are being filled with the smaller units. That's what we have to understand from here. And later, the number of workers employed were also not very large, because it was only 5% in 1911. When it moved on to 1931, when the industries were at its peak of the productions, it was only around 30%. So the rest of the 70% of the people are still in the category of unemployed. And now moving on to the 20th century, the most important changes occurred in the handloom industries. The cotton textile industries were started to face competition from the Manchester, what we discussed earlier, for large scale as well as for the small scale industries. The people, those who are producing, or the weavers community, has to face a lot of problems and a lot of troubles in order to sustain in the handloom business. Even the owners of the handlooms were facing tough times, but the growth has been stabilized and become steady only by around 1900 to 1940. But prior to this, the handloom industry was really facing a very difficult time. And when we move on to the situations, how did the situations got changed like this? The implementation of the technology added a boom to all industries. It is not restricted to any particular industry. Let us take cotton industry, let us take weaver industry. Any industry, technology has always added. It improved the efficiency, it improves the production, it reduces the workers. But the sad point is, the workers are being thrown out of the work wherever the technology has been implemented. Now, moving on to the fact here, second decade of the 20th century, which means around 1911 to 1920, we were able to see a machine called fly shuttle. The fly shuttle speeded up the production, as I told you just now. It speeded up the production, and simultaneously it has reduced the number of labor working under it. So the cost of production of the machine may be compensated by reducing the number of working members for the wages. If the wages are being reduced, automatically the cost which has been used to procure the machine can be balanced. That's how it has been added to a positive trend. And later, if you look at the statistics, 35% of the industries, especially small scale industries, which are located in the Travancore, Madras, Mysore, Cochin, are having the fly shuttle machinery with them, which means the technology has reached to a very larger scale and got connected to very large number of people. When we talked about the number of workers got employed, it is around only 30% in third decade ending, but in the second decade we have maybe having only 10 to 15% of the workers working. But when it comes to the using of the fly shuttle, here it is 35% of the machinery has been used in Travancore, Madras, Mysore and the Cochin regions. When we talk about the Bengal region, in Bengal, we have 70 to 80% of the people using this fly shuttle. So that's how the technology got mixed up in the day-to-day life, in the industrial production and in getting out the output also for the people. And when we talk about the situations, yes, the increase in the production will automatically add to get more benefits for the workers, more benefits for the owners, but in actual reality, the situation was not like that. The boom which was created by World War I did not last long, because as soon as the World War I came down, the products from Japan, the products from China, the products from Britain started to again flood in, and all were the machine made goods. These all machine made goods were giving a stiff competition for the Indian products. Yes, the other major factor which played its influence was harvest. Due to bad harvest, the people, those who are working in the factories, because of the lack of the cotton, they were facing very tough time. The situations were really worst for them. They could not find anything to eat. They could hardly find something to eat for them. And the owners or the people, those who are doing the business, were mobilizing the entire family to work in that, so that they can sustain in that. It was really a very tough time. Yes, of course, the saris, like the Banaras saris or the lungis, which are very famous with the handmade prints and all, were really having their good demand in the market, especially in the Tamil Nadu region or the Madras presidency, where the production was not so high but not so low. The production was on demand. The rich people were able to use it, get benefited from this, but whereas the poor were really facing a very tough time, and that's how the small scale industries could not perish as well as the large scale industries got in the later part of the 20th century. So really it was a very tough time for them to get consolidated and sustain, but somehow they managed, but their lives were not filled with joy and happiness. They were really facing lot of problems and struggled hard to get their life into success, but they could not see the success because on an overall large scale, if you look at that, the global economic depression was also in sustaining during that period. It is around 1930s when the global crisis got implemented here, and Gandhiji starting the civil disobedience movement, the non-cooperation movements, all these movements, the nationalist movements also had their influence on the small scale industries in not getting so successfully implemented. So somehow they managed to survive, but not to do business on a large scale. Market for the goods. As we discussed in the entire unit till now, that market for the goods has played a very vital role in this period. It may be Britishers, it may be the Indians, the craftsmen, the traders, the industrialists always want to create their own space in the market. They want to capture the hearts of the consumers so that the product cost would automatically glow into that and the business would flourish. So they want to capture the market by marketing it to a very larger scale. So that's how marketing got involved in the second decade of the 19th century, and the new products, for example, any new products which steps into the market needs some amount of publicity or some amount of understanding, some amount of idea for the people to get it. Then only the people would like to purchase that one. Then only the people have to be persuaded for that to go through or to take that particular product. So there should be a clear understanding for the person who want to buy a product on what he want to take from the market. So when there is something which is available in the market, that should be kept informed to the person who is in need. So advertisements started to play a very major role in the day-to-day activities of the business from the later part of the 20th century. Let us see them in detail now. How the English products or the Manchester products used to put their brands as the labels. Manufactured by the Manchester or made in Manchester. Today also we find many products like the Polo or Reebok. The brand name would be printed on the name. That's how the brands have come up today. But prior to this, we used to call them it as labeling. The labeling was there for the abroad products. For the Indian products, then what was the labeling for Indian products? Indian products were not labeled. Indian products were imprinted with the images of the Indian gods and the goddesses, which have given the divinity for the products and the divine blessing for the marketing sale. So that's how the Indians got connected. And not only this, if you put a label, only the educated community can understand. If you put an image, only the people, those who can visualize it, can understand the pictures. So in order to get connected to the Indians who are mostly uneducated, so the Indians started to put calendars. In calendars, though the people are educated or uneducated, they definitely use calendars to know the date and the month. So Indians started to print calendars with the Indian gods and the goddesses images and also the product's name. Along with the product's name printing under that, it is built or printed or made under the approval of the royal king, under the approval of the royal prince, under the approval of the royal court, which how the quality of the product would not be checked again. And when it talks about the Manchester products, Manchester people would believe that any product which has been released out of the Manchester would be taken with the trust. That's how they have branded it with Manchester. All these things added on to a very larger extent, and care Indian people always used to market their products by putting the word like nationalism. If you care for your nation, please buy the national products. Prove that you are an Indian. Show your patriotism by utilizing only the Indian products and the local Swadeshi goods. That's how Indians also used the spread the spirit of nationalism by using these marketing strategies. Finally, in the entire detailed procedure of the lesson, it is very simple to understand that in the Indian industrial age or the age of industrialization, hand technology and small scale industries played a very major role in the industrial landscape of India. We have seen how the industrial growth happened in Britain, how initial stages it has got the fluctuations with the lack of the workers, later how the problem was solved. Then I have moved to an example of India, where how the Indian industries were established. How did the Indian entrepreneurs get money for that? How the owners were able to make their fortunes by doing the trade with China and Britain. Then later how did they establish the factories? What was the rate of increase of the factories? What was the rate of growth of the workers? How did they overcome the workers problem here in India? In actual terms, there was no problem of workers scarcity in India at all. So after moving on all these stages, then we discussed how did the large industries sustain and then the small scale industries. After analyzing all these things, then we moved our discussion towards understanding the marketing strategies of the later part of the 20th century. Then we learned that branding got established during this period only. Britishers or Indians, whoever were producing anything, they always want to create a space, their own space in the market. It's not in the upper space, it is in the market, it is in the brains of the people that there is a particular product that can be utilized, that is of good quality. This idea they want to fill in the brains of the people. That's what the meaning of the word creating their own space. And then when any new product has been launched, that has to be explained clearly to the people. Then only they can understand what is the value of the product and how can he utilize the product. That's how the advertisement got emerged in this century. So advertisements started to play a very major role in this period. Now also we find many advertisements coming in the newspapers, magazines, television channels, all these things. Nowadays, the most important way of focusing any product is to go for advertisements. And during that period also, as today the marketing strategies are used, during that time also, Manchester used to have their own logo of labels saying that made in Manchester, which is an assurance and guarantee the buyer would feel confident that this is a quality worth product. That's what the image what the Manchester want to give by putting their name there. And Indian gods and Indian goddesses images were imprinted on the Indian goods to get that divine appeal for the people. That would automatically make the people to get connected towards their oneness. And also they Indian merchants used to print calendars so that not only the educated people, the uneducated people also can get understanding of the product by looking at the calendars, because everybody will use a calendar to know the date and the month in which we are, and also the year of course. And they also used to promote the feeling of nationalism, and also to encash that one they used to write care for the nation, use the Swadeshi products, use the national products. That's how prove your patriotism, by following and using the national products. And the final outcome of the unit is that the handmade technology, the small scale industries played a very major role in the industrial landscape of India. Indian industrial landscape has been marked by the imprint of hand technology and the small scale industries. That's what we have in this unit.
If you like this video, please give a thumbs up. Please subscribe to our channel to get more videos on CBSE syllabus.